You're listening to The Real Short Box, a comic book podcast made for geeks by geeks.
All right, welcome everybody to The Real Short Box. My name is Darren.
My name is Donald.
And my name is Supreme Chancellor Kevin.
Kevin, what are we doing today? What's the exciting thing that's happening?
We are interviewing a classical artist, writer from the comic book era that we love so much, the 1990s, even to the present, a man of many talents, and hopefully I will pronounce his name correctly, Jon Bogdanove.
No.
9.
Is it Jon Bogdanove?
Here's the thing. My son is a voice director on video games, like Fallout 4, Fallout 2, among many others. And one of the things he tells his actors is make a strong choice. Better strong and wrong.
Oh, the Nick Cage theory.
Right and weak. So, yes, so you completely screwed up my name, but that's good.
My apologies, sir.
No need to apologize. I remember being a kid and thinking, is it John Buscema? Is that Carmen in Santino? And of course, Bill Sienkiewicz.
There we go. Another one.
Yeah, there are tougher names than others. Mine is easier to break it down. It's Bogdanove, and if you're an old movie buff, it's a little bit like Peter Bogdanovich, the director from the 70s, except you scratch the itch.
Gotcha.
Well,
scratch that itch.
Well, thank you so much for that, and we will be issuing tongue lashings to Kevin later for that.
Don't even worry about it. Don't even worry about it. It was a good way to start.
So, first question I want to ask you is: it says you were born in Albany, New York, and you attended the School of Visual Arts in New York City. And I wanted to ask you, what did you think the benefit of attending that school was for your comic book career?
Well, I actually chose School of Visual Arts because Will Eisner was teaching there at the time. But I never actually got to teach his class because when in your freshman year and continuing into your sophomore year somewhat, there's a long list of, or at least there were in those days, a long list of sort of prerequisite classes you can take before you can start taking the classes you're really there for. and so I didn't qualify to apply to his class, to sign up for his class, until my sophomore year. And then in my sophomore year, it was already filled up with his previous students. And then I never got to go for my junior year because I ran out of money.
Well, geez. I know the feeling. Stuff's expensive. I went to college and had to take a break for a little bit to save for a little more, so.
Yeah, well, it was a different world back then. I think it was only something like, $2,300 per semester or something like that. But something ridiculously small compared to what tuition is there now.
Yeah.
But I was putting myself through college on, my savings from being a sternman in Maine, working on lobster boats. And in those days, working in the stern on a lobster boat was $25 a day for like a 13 or 14-hour day.
Really? Is that sort of like that World's Dangerous Catch show?
Yes, it's exactly like the World's Most Dangerous Catch show, except with the danger scaled way down.
Okay.
It's not that I didn't have a few dramatic close calls, but generally speaking, it's not as much. It's not as rugged as king crab fishing. It's a little bit more it's a little bit more civilized in a way, I guess. I don't know. I think a good example of, I think, what the life is like or was like in those days in Maine is the movie The Perfect Storm. It sort of gives a fairly good sense of what it was like being a lobster in those days, except that I wasn't fishing out of an inland port in Massachusetts. I was on an island 12 miles off the coast of Maine, so it was a little bit more primitive. We didn't have electricity. We still used kerosene lamps, and it was sort of a rugged 19th century lifestyle at the time. But yeah, it's a little bit like The Most Dangerous Catch, with the danger scaled way down.
So I remember, I think they did like a knockoff of that show Dangerous Catch, and they called it Lobster Men.
Yeah.
And I think that had to do with around Maine, if I recall.
Probably.
Yeah, and they were trying to up the danger and stuff. But after watching Deadliest Catch, you were like, so if these guys fall in the water, they get back out of the water.
Well, I had some interesting sort of semi-close calls. I was out there for The Perfect Storm. I guess it was the storm of '78, or when the storm hit at the same time there was a moon tide, and the surge came right up through the harbor, and it drowned the wharf under side-deep water, and this was a day or so before Trap Day, which is the day that the island fishermen all put their traps in the water in those days, was January 1st. And the storm hit, and everybody's gear was on the wharf, so we had to run down and rescue these stacks of hundreds of in those days heavy wood traps that were stacked up, and the wind was literally picking them up and spinning them end over end out to sea. So we had to really move fast. And at one point I almost got sucked down between two of the stones in the wharf because the surge was so powerful it was moving these big granite blocks. I saw a fish house get washed off the beach and carried out to sea, and then 10, 15 minutes later brought back up onto the beach and deposited it almost from where it left. So,
wow.
This has nothing to do with comics, I realize, but that's the deep background for lobstering.
We've all seen the movie, so
So this was all in the Gulf of Maine.
Excuse me?
This was all in the Gulf of Maine?
Yes, this is all in the Gulf of Maine, off the mid coast, not far from the Muscogee Bay, but a little further out. I believe that Monhegan is the most remote island in the Maine archipelago. It's not exactly coast. It was a primordial volcano, so it's a little bit different geology, a little bit different structure to the island, and also a little bit further out than the other islands.
Did you do any art on board the vessel to keep past time?
Not on board the vessel, because when I was working, I was working. You know what I mean? I was baiting bags and baiting traps and trying not to foul the walk on my feet. But Monhegan is it's a long-time artist colony. It's attracted artists like Robert Henry and all three generations of Wyeth, N.C. Wyeth, Andrew Wyeth, and Jamie Wyeth has a house out there, which in my carpentry days out there I worked on. And my grandfather was a painter and a muralist, which is how we ended up having a house out there. My grandfather came out there, I think, he bought a house out there in 1918, and my father spent his summers out there, and then when I was a kid, we'd go out for a week or 10 days at a time in the summer, and then when I graduated from high school, needed to make money, and I went out to Manhattan to work.
Excellent. So our co-host here, Kevin, is actually also from New York. He has a very interesting question for you that he wanted to ask.
It's a question I ask every guest, and even amongst ourselves. What made you fall in love with comics, Jon?
Oh, well, first of all, where are you from in New York?
I grew up outside the Bronx, mostly in the Rockland County area.
Oh, right on. Really, that's where Walter and Louise live. Simonton.
What, Nyack or Spring Valley? Where they?
No, they live up in Suffern, basically.
Suffern, okay.
But that's Rockland County. It's still right in the area.
Yep, right across Thamesley Bridge.
Yeah. Oh, it's a lovely area to grow up in. Really, very, very comic booky. There are actually a lot of us up in Rockland County.
Absolutely. My comic book store was the old Wizard comic store when it was around.
Oh, no kidding. So
Yeah.
where are you guys now? Are you based in that region?
Oh no, we're based in the Los Angeles area.
Oh, okay. All right. So fellow transplants. That's nice.
We're chilling at the Krusty Bunkers right now, actually.
You're over there right now?
Yeah.
So we'd be doing this in person if it weren't for the whole pandemic shelter in place ruling.
Correct.
Right.
Okay. All right. Well, apologies, listeners, for the remote sound quality, but I just pretend we're sitting here amongst the glorious Neil Adams paraphernalia.
So what first got you interested in comic books, sir?
Oh, I think it was really George Reeves, the old George Reeves Superman TV show.
Really?
Yeah, it was in reruns when I was a kid, and I would, fly home from kindergarten and then watch it lie on the sort of watching it from the dining room table, lying on the table, flying with a towel tied around my neck.
For me, when I was younger, I really got into Superman because of the old, the Fleischer cartoons.
Oh
that
yes,
they had.
those are awesome.
Ooh, those are amazing. How did you stumble across them?
Stumbled across them. Basically, my family was pretty poor, so but we did have, for some reason, we were always able to have some type of entertainment form. So we got a VCR. We were pretty stoked about that, and then my mom went over to Big Lots, and they always had like cheap movies and stuff that you could pick up. And she found these old Fleischer cartoons on VHS, and would for like $1 or $2, and brought them home, and I fell in love. I was like, these are amazing. And for a kid from my time, I was growing up in the 80s, and I was introduced to like Ninja Turtles and Thundercats and Transformers and stuff. For something like that to catch my eye, it had to be pretty significant. So that, just some beautiful drawings in that, and just the way it was put together was just mind-boggling, still to this day.
Yeah, I think I'm a big fan of those Fleischer cartoons, and they were, I think the high watermark for that studio, and still I think the best looking Superman on screen. They of course back in the 80s they had fallen out of copyright, and so there were a billion knockoff VHS tapes of them that you could pick up for $1. I had many of them myself. I think they are, since a few years ago, they were all gathered and restored. Even the racist war propaganda ones were gathered and restored by Warner Brothers, who has resecured the rights. And if you buy the golden anniversary whatever collection from Warner Home Video, the cover was actually drawn by me in sort of a Schustery Fleischer style, but the cover artwork for the collective authorized collected edition or something like that. That's actually me pretending to be a Golden Age guy.
Do you know if that's still available, by the way?
I'm pretty sure it's still available. I've come across it in Best Buy from time to time, saying, "Oh my God, this is still here." So yes, I think it's still available. And if it's not, your listeners can of course get it from DC Direct, because if you have a subscription to DC Direct, you can get everything.
Ah,
Excellent.
I mean, not to plug them too heavily, but literally every DC character movie, every DC character TV show throughout history, including George Reeves, who influenced me to look to discover comics, and the Fleischer cartoons, everything right back to the dawn of time and the early movie serials. It's all available, as well as all the cartoons and all the comic books. You can go back and look at my old stuff on Superman and just have it at your fingertips without it taking up any shelf space.
Okay, let me ask you, real quick, how did you get your first industry job as far as, working on Alpha Flight number 32 at Marvel?
Oh, well, let me see. I was living with my wife Judy on her houseboat in the Hudson River.
sorry to interrupt, but so your first work was on a Marvel comic.
That's correct. Yes.
Wow, that's gotta really make you feel pretty good. Like a lot of artists that I've talked to in the past, they start out on very independent projects or on some unknown company somewhere that shutters in a year or something. But your first piece of work, your first actual full comic that you did artwork on, was a Marvel comic.
That's correct. Marvel Alpha Flight number 32, I think. Yeah. Well, I mean, dude, it was different days back then. This is 35 years ago. Well, close to it. Yeah, 35 years ago. And it was still, the tail end of the Marvel age of comics in those days. There was still a bullpen with, Jack Abel hanging out, telling jokes, and Mary Severin, and the classic bullpen with all the offices of editors arrayed around, and everybody had their doors open, and it was kind of like a groovy, communal, non-corporate vibe in those days, and you could quite literally call up an editor as a stranger, as a kid off the street, and ask to come in and show your portfolio. And in those days, every editor set aside, I don't know, an afternoon a week or whatever to break young wannabes' hearts. And you could go in and show your portfolio in person and see the bullpen and absorb that glorious vibe, and maybe in my incredibly lucky case, walk out with a job. It was a different time. I mean, I'm old enough, dude. When I broke in at Marvel Comics, Stan Lee was still doing his Stan Soapbox column every month. And I was lucky enough to get a classic Stanley bullpen nickname in the Stan Soapbox column. So I'm forever jocular Jon Bogdanove.
There we go.
So yeah, it was nice. I got welcomed by Stan and everything. Print. Wow. It was a good. Yeah, it was kind of the way. I mean, I feel very lucky about this because things changed not much after I broke in, but I really broke in a way that, as a fan, reading letters columns and stuff, you kind of dreamed of. You dreamed of going through the front door and some editor saying, "Kid, you're not leaving here without a job," and here's the standard rich and famous contract. Well, not so much rich, but but that's not exactly unlike the way it happened, and being there in those offices at that time, it really felt like the Bullpen Bulletin stage. It really felt like the way Stan had sort of sold Marvel Comics to the fans for, at that point, almost a generation. It felt like a Marvel. The atmosphere was relaxed and jovial, and there was a certain kind of let's try anything attitude there. It was not a corporate vibe at that point. It was not ruled by committee and hamstrung by legal departments. It was it's comics. Nobody's paying attention. Let's do what we want. Let's do what interests us. Let's do what's fun. And so they could take a chance on a new kid coming in off the street.
Yeah, some of the characters I'm amazed that like exist. If somebody told me, when I was younger and I was never introduced to Ghost Rider, that there was going to be a character with a flaming skull and a leather jacket riding a motorcycle that's also on fire, I'd be like, you're on something. Leave me alone. But that exists, and it's quite popular.
Yes, and thoroughly awesome.
Yeah.
It's like a painting on the side of a van. Perfect.
Yeah. And since we're talking about things that are pretty spectacular, I must say that, and I'm sure you've heard it plenty of times, but I must say that your work on the Man of Steel, Superman the Man of Steel, was stellar. I'm a big fan. I have about, I would say, 30 to 35 copies of Superman the Man of Steel number 19. It's one of my favorite covers of all time.
Thank you.
Just a big fan of your work, sir, and of what you've done with Superman in general. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about DC and Superman and stuff, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Few questions here. When it came to Superman, how exactly did that job come about? Did you get that from? Did they see your work on Marvel and then offer you, or did you have to pitch to them, or how did that work?
In my years at Marvel, one of the projects that I did fairly early on was a miniseries written by Chris Claremont called Fantastic Four versus the X-Men.
Okay.
That was a 4-issue miniseries where I got to draw the Fantastic Four, and the X-Men, and worked with Chris Claremont, who was one of my heroes, and the editor of the Fantastic Four book at that point was a gentleman we now know as the Great Carlini. Mike Carlin was editor of Fantastic Four at the time. And I think he actually left Marvel while I was working on the miniseries, but we had become friendly, chatting on the phone, and we met once or twice, and he met my wife Judy and our son Kal-El, and he then shortly got hired by DC to be John Byrne's editor on Superman the Man of Steel, because he had been John's editor on the Fantastic Four. So Mike knew how strongly I felt about Superman. He knew that really Superman was it for me, my totem, my real passion project, the thing I really wanted more than anything. Judy and I named our son Kal-El.
So
Yeah. Speaking of which, did you talk to Nick Cage about that after he named his son Kal-El?
His son is much younger than ours.
Ah.
Our Kal-El came much earlier, several years earlier.
Right.
Our Kal-El is now 34 years old, and I'm now, Kal-El used to be the son of Jon Bogdanove, but now Jon Bogdanove is the father of Kal-El Bogdanove.
That makes you sure.
He's way bigger, hipper, cooler than I am. Comics are sort of a cultural backwater compared to video games. He's sort of earned quite a name for himself in the realm of video games. But anyway, back in the day, we were living in Maine, and I was I had finished drawing Power Pack, and I was drawing. I spent about a year drawing X Factor. I was drawing X Factor when Mike invited me to come and draw Superman, and I was hesitant at first because I didn't have necessarily the self-confidence to do it. I thought, I really want to be at the peak of my powers when I draw Superman. It seems like a little soon, blah, 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 blah. I didn't want to bail on Louise because she was writing X Factor, and I didn't want to just leave her in the lurch. And I sort of hemmed and hawed, even though Superman was what I really wanted to do. So Mike enlisted Kal-El's aid. Kal-El's like 7 years old at the time, and he started to get these boxes started to arrive at the house for Kal-El from Mike Carlin, and inside these boxes would be all kinds of cool DC merch of various types. With a little note to Kal-El, and then Kal-El would come into the studio, and he'd sidle up to my desk and say, Pop, you really ought to go to work on Superman for Mike Carlin. So in I guess in early 1992 or thereabouts, Mike upped the offer a little bit, and he said, "Look, if you come to DC and can convince Weezy to come too, we'd like to give you guys a new book rather than taking over Action Comics, which are one of Adventures, I guess, was the one I was originally going to do. Come in, we're going to give you your own title from issue number 1, and join the crew." So Mike also called Weezy and pitched it to her, and I, it'd be a good question to ask her if you interview Louise Simonson, why she chose to go do Superman. I almost think she did it because she liked me, but I know she also did it because she liked Mike. I don't know if she ever was that big a Superman fan or not. It's just odd because she became one of the greatest writers ever on the character. But in any case, in 1992, Louise and I were hired on to write and draw Superman: The Man of Steel #1.
That's great. That was a fantastic run and some fantastic art on that. And like I said, the first full cover I think we've got of Doomsday was with your artwork, if I recall, was the Man of Steel #18, and it had him with his one arm tied behind his back in the green suit still with the red goggle things on, bursting out of the ground basically in a way, or out through the cover and coming right at you. And it was so striking and so visual that it is probably, when you think of iconic covers, one of the most iconic covers, if from the 90s at least, if not in the last 30, 40 years or however long it's been. Even Mattel, when they did their Doomsday figure, they did him in a pose when they did their Comic-Con exclusive a few years back, where it's replicating that cover of him in the green bursting forth, and it's just fantastic. That figure's huge. If you haven't seen it in person, it is something to behold for sure. But it was a great piece of work and a great time. I'm gonna kick us over to Darren real quick. You had a question, right, Darren?
Of course. So John, pardon me for a second. I just need to kind of set a premise here. So on this podcast, we have a number of listeners who are, of course, not only huge fans of comic books, but we have folks that are amateur artists, amateur writers, people that are really working hard to get into this. And I had noticed when I had researched you that, of course, you were working at DC Comics in the 90s. And I was wondering because when you're working for a big company such as DC, there's certain protocols you certainly would have to follow. There's certain corporate structures there that you have to work with. And my question for you to maybe address our audience is if you were to work at a company like DC, what advice would you give them for their best opportunity to succeed?
Well, I mean, take everything I say with a grain of salt because it's a different era now. It's a different company in many ways, and things are done differently now. But I think the basics of good visual storytelling apply whether you are doing comic books or animation or being a director of photography on a film. I think basically telling a story with pictures is like writing, except instead of words, your vocabulary is images. So I think being a really good, standout visual storyteller is really important. There are a lot of wonderful draftsmen in the business these days. There are people who draw beautifully. There are people who seem to draw beautifully, who trace photographs, but there's a lot of very clean, beautiful artwork out there now. But there isn't always top-notch storytelling. So, and comics themselves, comics as a medium, have certain advantages and idioms that give them advantages over, say, illustration or storyboards or something like that, in that you can use things like forced perspective, deep foreshortening. You can if you're writing, you can use things like thought balloons. There are things that you have to do in comics, particularly with the art, to convey movement and action with still images. If you're doing storyboards, for instance, for a superhero film, you have to make things that are visually possible, and the film, because even if they're doing CG, they're still going to have CG people that are proportioned like the actors. So, but with a film, you have the advantage of actually showing the motion. In comics, you have to convey the motion with no motion. You have to convey the action and the drama and all the feeling without the talent of stuntmen and actors to actually give it to you. So you have to be able to do more than just draw beautifully. You have to do more than just trace stills from your favorite movies and change the costumes. You have to really, in order to stand out, in order to be in demand, you want to learn how to be an actor so that you convey more with gesture and expression than most people do in comics these days. You have to be able to know how and where to push things and exaggerate things, whether it's the acting of the characters, whether it's the perspective on their figures, or whatever, to make a story more engaging, to draw your audience in, because all comics really are, and this may be a little theoretical, but I'm going to throw it out there anyway. Your main job the essence of your job as a comic book artist is to be a trigger for the reader's imagination. In other words, Scott McCloud once said that comics happen in the borders between panels, in the gutters between panels in a comic book, and that's true. And what he meant, I believe, is that comics are really a collaboration between you, the artist, between the artist and the writer, and the reader, because a good portion of the creation of the experience happens inside the reader's own imagination. The reader's imagination is easily 30% of the experience, and which is why comics are such an intimate medium, which is why people can be so passionate about this art form, because when you fall in love with a comic book, it's because you have contributed to your reading experience of it in a way that you don't with a more passive form of entertainment like television and movies. You really are invested in it. And so if you're going to be a comic book artist, it's good to keep that in mind, that what you're trying to do is not make necessarily a photorealistic image. What you're trying to do is provide the necessary triggers for a reader's imagination, so that the reader feels the emotion, so the reader feels the kinesthetics of the action in a way that is sometimes more potent than you could possibly get with a movie.
That last remark was largely profound. I'm very glad you shared that with us, and I know for a fact our listeners will greatly appreciate that. I'm going to toss it over to Donald, though, because there's just a question that came to his mind that I'm surprised didn't come to ours yet.
Yeah, real quick, I guess, or as quick as we can get it through. So I was blabbering on about my love of your work on Superman, the Man of Steel, and rightfully so. But a question that came to my mind was, what were your thoughts when they said, "Hey, we're gonna kill Superman"? And you always had wanted to work on Superman, getting the Superman book, and then them saying, "By the way, now we're going to kill him." What were your thoughts? What was going through your head when you heard that come through?
Well, again, I have to reaffirm that this was sort of a different time. And the way that the Superman books were created back in the day was unlike anything that's done now. Mike, like me, had cut his teeth at Marvel when it was still the Marvel Age. And when he took over the Superman books, I think what he was doing was giving DC its own Marvel Age, because we did those books very much the way Stan and Jack did the Marvel books back in the early days. We did them bullpen style. So twice a year or so, DC would fly the whole team to a location, and by the whole team I mean everybody, the writers, the pencilers, the inkers, even the colorists, everybody for all the Superman books would gather together in one location, usually a conference room at DC, but occasionally other places as well. I think my first meeting was down in Florida, near the set of the Superboy show at the time. But yeah, so we'd be locked in a conference room somewhere with a big chart on the wall that we would divide up into squares for every issue in sequence for the coming year, and Mike would have dry erase markers, and he'd be filling in the blocks as we would all workshop ideas together as a group, and everybody got to contribute. So there are some ideas that were Dan's, there were some ideas that were Wheezy's, there were some ideas that were Roger's, but there were also some ideas that were mine, there were some ideas that were Jerry's, there were some ideas that were Butch Geiss's, there was some, whoever was working on the books, even Glenn Whitmore, the colorist, contributed things or modified other people's ideas or fixed problems or filled in gaps with other ideas until in a sort of what became a sort of a beautiful organic kind of writer's room process that I don't think has been done successfully like that ever since. I mean, when I think of the titanic task of editing that Mike Carlin had to do just to run those meetings, it's kind of mind-boggling because I'm not the only guy who was super passionate about Superman those days. You know, everybody felt very strongly about him. A lot of us had grown up also watching George Reeves and being heavily influenced by that TV show. And everybody really cared. And so Mike, as ringmaster, had to find a way to triage all these passionate agendas in such a way that they came out in the best way for the readers. And that had to be, particularly the older I get, the more amazed I am by it. It had to be the most superhuman editing job in history, in the history of comics. But anyway, that's how they were done. That's how the Superman books were done.
Uh-huh.
And so we'd be sitting around, spinning seed crystals at each other and throwing out ideas. And if we ever got stuck for an idea and needed some jump starting, Jerry Ordway would pipe up in the back with his usual hackneyed clam of a joke, which was, and then, next issue, we kill him. And we'd all grown and rolled our eyes because we'd only heard it about 40 times that day.
Yeah.
But then something strange happened. We had been in the midst, and forgive me, those of you out there who have heard this story before, but I'll try and get through it quickly.
Sure.
We had been in the process of moving Superman and Lois toward getting married because it just made sense. And Lois had just learned Clark's secret identity, and we were progressing in a very sort of natural way toward a wedding, which would have been an event. This was sort of before events became a thing, but nevertheless, it was going to be something that we all tried to participate in across all 4 books. We had a lovely year of continuity of leading up to it in a natural way. When the show Lois and Clark became a reality. And on the television show, Lois and Clark aren't married. The show starts at the beginning of their relationship. And so so DC Comics said, wait a minute. And Mike and Jeanette got together and said, how cool would it be if the show's a success that Lois and Clark, the TV show, which was sort of a romantic show focusing on their relationship, what if they get married on the show at the same time they get married in the comics? Can we put it off in the comics until we see whether the show is successful or not? And that was actually a brilliant idea. I forget if it was Mike's idea or Jeanette's idea, but between the two of them, they cooked up this idea like, okay, there's an actual TV show now. That's going to help. That could be used to bring people to read the comics. Let's see if we can't coordinate continuity a little bit. And it would have been awesome because I don't think there had ever been a time when a comics version and a television version were actually synced up,
Right.
in same continuity. So that was going to be pretty revolutionary. So when Mike and Jeanette came back into the room and sprung this, to be a very brilliant idea on us, we were thrilled because from our perspective, we had been stuck in a windowless, airless, outgassing carpet, fluorescently lit conference room for 3 days. And also, more than that, we were really married to our year of continuity. We really liked what we had written together. But, the word came down, no, we're going to shelve all this. We'll pick it up later at another date. We're going to shelve all this, but we need to do something in the meanwhile while Lois and Clark, the TV show, is getting its legs under it. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? And we're sitting there, and the crickets are cricketing, and we're just trying to shift gears now because we had our chops all set to do this wonderful year of continuity, and we've got to start all over. And we've already been here 3 days, and oh God, I got to pee, and it was a whole thing. It was turning into sort of a pressure cooker. So the room is silent, and Jerry in the back naturally goes, "Oh, then we kill him. Then we kill him."
Yeah. I think, John, that's a good place. And we're going to have to wrap up here shortly, but we had one more.
Well, let me just bring it to a nice tight end for you then.
Okay, sure.
So what happened differently this time is that Louise Simonson, who as editor of the X books at Marvel had killed many characters quite successfully, she said, "You know what you get from killing a character? You get to tell the story of what that character meant to everybody else in the world. His friends and family, his enemies, and the world at large. You get to tell that story." And that's when Jerry's joke stopped being a joke.
Wow. That's something. I always wondered about with the Lois and Clark thing, because Deborah Joyce Levine, I believe was her name, she was the showrunner of Lois and Clark, and she always said from the start, at the end of this show's run, you will see Lois and Clark get married. And I always wondered how hard could it have been to link the comics time-wise with the series, because you just never knew season after season what was going to happen. Were they going to get renewed? Were they not? What was, as a viewer anyway, you just didn't know. So it was always, to me, quite fascinating how that happened. So thank you for sharing that. That was actually quite fascinating.
Well, I mean, again, credit where credit is due. I think Joy Levine and Jeanette Kahn were chums.
Okay.
So I think the two women at the top, again, would have facilitated the coordination of the two continuities.
That would make sense.
So that worked out. And sorry it didn't. I'm sorry it never did quite. But
hey, guys, I'm just a quick interruption here. I just want to mention We Can Be Heroes, the best comic shop in the valley, possibly the world. We Can Be Heroes is in Chatsworth, California. Come on down for 20% off on a pull list, vintage toys, new toys, collectibles, vintage comics, gaming, and more. Guys, they really got it going over there. It's a great spot just to hang out. It's like the Cheers of comic shops. We Can Be Heroes, Chatsworth, California.
All right, so we have this one final question for you here, sir. We're going to hand it over to Kevin.
Yes, what type of classes will you be teaching here at the Krusty Bunkers?
Oh, well, okay. If we all survive the pandemic, yeah. Here's the thing. I was going to teach a class at the Krusty Bunkers starting yesterday, and of course, that got shut down by the coronavirus. So we're still going to do it. We're just going to postpone it to an as yet undecided date, because we have to wait and see when we're able to do it, when we're actually allowed to do it again. But everybody who's paid for the class are automatically in it unless they want a refund. And there's still room, because of this, there will still be room for new people to sign up. But this is basically a class in visual storytelling for anybody who anybody who wants to improve their storytelling, visual storytelling ability. So it's for comic book artists, but it's also for animators. It's also for filmmakers. Anybody who tells stories in pictures and wants to improve that skill or inform that skill. So I'll be talking about comics, of course, primarily comics, but I'll also be talking about storyboards from my storyboarding experience, and we'll be covering the step by step the principles of telling the story effectively in pictures, and it's primarily a course for adults. It's not a little kids course, but if you're a 14-year-old and you've got serious talent and are able to handle a grown-up atmosphere with actual grown-up professionals, we're not going to turn you away because of your age. We're gonna make this course be whatever people need.
Right.
That sounds hugely beneficial. It sounds quite entertaining, and helpful.
Well, it's also a great place to do something like this because, you guys know you're there. We're in a comic shop that's not just a comic shop. It's a cultural center. It's a hub for comics and gaming related activities. So, and besides that, on the wall, it's all this great art by one of the greatest legends in the history of comics, a man who is, basically on the same plateau as Jack Kirby, Will Eisner, Walter Simonson, the legend himself, the William Shatner of comics, Neil Adams. So I really think that getting a great group of students together in this fantastic, magical, super inspiring atmosphere is going to make for a pretty cool class. And I believe the plans still include life drawing class after the comics course. So you can sign up for both. And the life drawing class is not going to be like those life drawing classes that drove me crazy in art school where, you stand around for 3 hours drawing somebody's love handles. Right? This is going to be a life drawing course where the actors pose where we have them pose in storytelling poses. So there will be classic action poses. But there'll also be civilian poses and clothing. So that everything you draw in that class will be useful and applicable sometime along in your future for reference.
That's sounds like a great opportunity, and just
very smart.
Just adding to a number of the great activities already here at the Cressy Bunkers. Well, Jon, it's been a true pleasure. I know I speak for the rest of us here that we would be more than happy to interview you anytime. You've been very interesting to talk to, very helpful and informative, and I know our audience is absolutely going to adore this interview.
Well, thanks very much. I'm happy to do it.
Yes, thank you so much for coming on and taking the time to be with us today during this trying times, which is the more important to have entertainment and things like podcasts and stuff out there so people can get news and or just be entertained and shut their mind off or think of something different than what they're thinking of now and think of comic books.
I will say podcasts at this time, since there is no real radio anymore, having a podcast like yours at this time, if you're stuck at home, as I am even when there isn't a pandemic, I'm stuck at home drawing. It's nice to be able to hear conversations from people and know that there's still a world out there where, other people care about the same things that you do. And so thank you guys for what you're doing. And I hope you'll send me a link to the show.
Absolutely.
We will gladly do that. Thank you.
And we would love to have you listen to our history pods. We did an 8-parter on Marvel Comics history. I think you would enjoy it.
Ooh, I think I would. That sounds ideal. I would. Please send me a link. I will definitely listen to it while I draw the next page.
All right.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, sir. It's been a pleasure. You have a lovely evening.
Thank you, guys.
Take care.
All right, so Nick over here, thank you for hanging with us here, Nick. Nick, I know you want to have an opportunity to please share with the world what you would like to share.
Well, his art classes, as well as any of your comic book needs or gaming needs, will be available at the Neil Adams Krusty Bunkers Comics and Toys and Games, and soon to be and art classes.
Whoa!
Such diversification.
We are located at 4710 West Magnolia Boulevard in Burbank, California, 91505. And you can reach us on phone at area code 818-980-8852. And if there's any books you need during this global pandemic, we'll get them set aside for you and give you either curbside delivery or mail them out to you.
And not only books, also board games, which is unfortunate during this pandemic that we cannot utilize your massive board game area for a big board game party.
Right, that would be kind of fun, especially since it's free. It's free. There's no charge to play board games here. Am I correct?
That's right. There is no board game charge. Unlike other stores, we charge you $0.
You are too merciful,
How do you
sir.
charge? Like, is there like is that table fee?
Yeah,
Like,
I think
what
they
is
do
this,
like
a
an hour,
casino?
like
You
a
sure there's no
table,
hidden fees, Nick?
There's no hidden fees. We just ask you to have a good time, and if you want to buy something, please do.
Yeah. But yeah, so thank you, Nick, for being here, for letting us be here at Krusty Bunkers. Thanks to John for being on with us, and thanks to you, the listener, for listening to our podcast here at the Real Short Box. We are available on a number of streaming apps and stations. We are on SoundCloud currently. We are on
Google Play,
iTunes.
We're also on Blueberry, Spreaker, and a few, actually quite a few others, Spotify, and all whole bunch. You can think of it. Usually we're on there, and if not, we will be soon. Absolutely. YouTube. We're on Instagram and Facebook. If you want to reach out, send us a message. Let us know what you think, or if you want us to do a podcast on something in the future, let us know, and we can maybe make that happen. So thank you guys for coming out. Thank you so much. For listening to The Real Short Box. My name is Donald.
my name is Kevin.
And my name is Darren, and big thank you to Nick once again.
Yes, and
Thank you guys for coming in.
yeah, thank you so much. And maybe Nick, if we see you again, hopefully it will be somewhere here
At the comic shop.
This has been The Real Short Box. We'll see you at the comic shop. Thanks for listening.